Hey, I'm Dummy, and recently The Athletic, which is basically the New York Times' sports website, came out with a stadium ranking for the World Cup. I had been musing on the idea of creating this video for a little bit, but this ranking really pushed me to make it. I heavily disagree with a lot of their stadium placements, and I felt like I could create a more cohesive list, though I know that you cannot make everybody happy. There are 16 venues hosting matches at the 2026 World Cup, spread across the US, Canada, and Mexico, the three host nations. They range from 43,000 seats to 81,000 seats, and from sea level to 7,220 feet above it, and they certainly all look different as well. I'm going to be ranking them for their suitability for soccer, their accommodation for fans, how easy they are to access, and of course, how they look. With all that being said, let's get into the list, where I will also be noting where the Athletic ranked each of these stadiums. In 16th and last, I chose Foxborough, Massachusetts Gillette Stadium, also known as Boston Stadium, even though it is not, in fact, in Boston. The Athletic put Gillette at fourth, which I think is just mind boggling. The stadium looks fine. It's an early 2000s outdoor design with a capacity of 64,146, kind of similar to Lincoln Financial Field, but I think Gillette has a much less distinctive look. The sightlines here are okay, and it's got a pretty solid jumbotron with good in-house accommodations as well. Interestingly, in addition to the New England Patriots, this stadium does host a full-time soccer team, the New England Revolution, but they play on turf and seemingly don't really like being at Gillette, which makes sense because it is way too big for an MLS team in addition to being on turf. However, this is by far the worst stadium when it comes to getting to and from it. I mean, it's half an hour from Boston and even longer from Providence, which means that it's essentially in the middle of nowhere. Seriously, look at the satellite view. There's almost nothing in its vicinity, and Foxborough, the town it is allegedly in, is barely a town. Sure, there's parking and there's a couple of hotels and restaurants nearby, but as a venue for a major tournament, it is a frustrating choice, and I believe somewhere like Pittsburgh or Baltimore would have been a better pick. In 15th, I chose East Rutherford, New Jersey's MetLife Stadium, currently known as New York, New Jersey Stadium. It's the home of the New York Jets and New York Giants in the NFL, and it continues the theme of bizarre naming for stadiums and teams, since neither the Jets nor the Giants have played in New York for decades. This stadium is last on the athletics list, but I rate it higher than Gillette Stadium for a few reasons. It's a much larger and more modern stadium, for one, and you do have a more robust transit network in the area to get to the stadium. Plus, it's actually really close to East Rutherford, which is kind of a real city. It's going to host the World Cup final, and it is outfitted well to do so with 80,663 seats, which makes it the second largest stadium at the World Cup, behind only Estadio Azteca. Anyways, though, on to the bad. It's in a massive concrete desert right next to a disused indoor arena, a gigantic mall, and a race course, which aren't the most visually appealing complimentary venues. In fact, it's the second largest parking lot in the world. The largest will be later on the list, and it's not as vertical as Gillette is, so some of the third deck seats are further back from the pitch, which isn't ideal, especially for soccer. The stadium is again one of the stadiums that required grass to be installed, which wasn't done for previous Copa America and Gold Cup games held at it. Obviously, this was required anyways, but MetLife Turf has always been considered the bottom of the barrel compared to other NFL stadiums, especially because of the number of injuries due to or partially due to the turf. These include really notable players like Aaron Rodgers, Nick Bosa, and Malik Neighbors. Rodgers' injury was actually so bad that it made the NFLPA call for grass fields in all NFL venues, something that has not been implemented as of yet, but they are talking about it again because of the World Cup. In its entirety, MetLife is modern and it has the amenities, but a poor location, some poor viewing experiences, and cost to get there if you're staying in New York City, as many tourists are wont to do, doom it to the bottom of the list and close to where the Athletic put it. Now, on to number 14, I chose Arrowhead Stadium, currently known as Kansas City Stadium, home of the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City, Missouri. At 69,045 seats, this is the fifth largest stadium on the list, and it has a good in stadium environment, but that's about all it has going for it. The Athletic ranked the stadium tied for fifth, which I just thought was crazy, especially with its 9 out of 10 suitability for soccer rating. Built in 1972, it's a very old stadium and it's showing its age for sure, especially as the Chiefs now have a new home on the Kansas side of Kansas City for 2031, and they can afford to keep Arrowhead on essentially maintenance mode. Arrowhead does have real grass, which is a step up from the last two stadiums, but it has a much more horizontal angle to its seats, which means that many of the higher up seats are very far removed from the pitch. It is also, again, far from the center of Kansas City, and with fewer transportation options than New York or Boston, even, it can be a pain to get to. Interestingly, it shares its massive parking lot with the Kansas City Royals baseball team, though they too are moving in the medium term future. Arrowhead has hosted a few U.S. men's and women's national team games over the years, and it did host MLS's Sporting Kansas City from 1996 until 2007, but it was designed solely for football. It's old, it's out of the way, and it's not a great venue for soccer, but it has a lot of in stadium excitement that makes it a great place to be a fan. In 13th is the Big D itself, AT&T Stadium in Arlington, not Dallas, Texas. Although it is, in fact, called Dallas Stadium for the World Cup, the 70,649 seat venue is in the weird, built up concrete jungle that lies between Fort Worth and Dallas, which some people call Arlington. Home of the Dallas Cowboys, it is seated right next to Globe Life Field, home of the Texas Rangers, and the now tenantless Choctaw Stadium, the Rangers' former home. AT&T Stadium, which actually has a third name, Jerry World, after the infamous owner of the Dallas Cowboys, is probably the least accessible major stadium in the entirety of the United States. There is no permanent public transport near the stadium, and the last time I visited, we parked in a paid parking lot about a 20-minute walk from the stadium, which I imagine is a lot less fun in the middle of June than it was on Thanksgiving, and it wasn't really all that fun then. The stadium itself is, to be sure, a marvel. It's massive, the fourth largest dome in the world, actually, and the concessions and amenities are great, especially the HVAC system in the Texas heat. The pitch itself was raised about 2.5 feet so that it could accommodate soccer dimensions, and of course, grass had to replace the turf that it usually has. But the stadium has hosted soccer matches many a time. For this event, the lower bowl had to be altered, and capacity was reduced by several thousand since they were raising the pitch. The sightlines are fine. It's not as broad as some of the others on the list, but there are certainly some bad seats. The stadium is generally just okay when it comes to suitability for soccer as a whole. The Athletic also had this one in a three-way tie for 13th, which I think is probably about right. In 12th on my list, but 10th according to The Athletic, is the home of the Philadelphia Eagles, Lincoln Financial Field, known as Philadelphia Stadium for the World Cup. First off, this stadium complex is pretty cool because it hosts all four of Philadelphia's major sports teams: the Phillies, the Flyers, the 76ers, and the Eagles from the MLB, NHL, NBA, and NFL, respectively, all play in like the same parking lot area. The biggest thing this stadium has going for it is its ease of transportation and its in venue environment. You can get there pretty easily by subway, and though some of the higher seats are fairly far back, it is generally a solid place to play soccer. And it has hosted some big tournaments before, including the 2025 Club World Cup and the 2003 Women's World Cup, which means it is a fairly well prepared for a large soccer environment. But its only permanent tenants are the Eagles and college football's Temple Owls, who have one of the most oversized stadiums in the NCAA. The Philadelphia Union did play here for their inaugural season, but they quickly moved into a soccer specific stadium because, again, the MLS is not popular enough to sell out a 68,324 seat venue. The main problem here is that outside of the ease of getting there, you are totally cordoned in by highways on all four sides once leaving the venue. And basically, all of Philadelphia's historic sites and great restaurants are not easy to access if you're talking about them in terms of walkability from the stadium. I do generally like how Lincoln Financial Field looks, but much like the Athletics' Joshua Cloak, I had no idea that the stadium's east and west stands were meant to evoke an eagle's wings, and it does have some bothersome asymmetry from the air. However, in all, this is where the stadiums get reasonably good, and it does make sense that this has hosted large soccer games before. Just missing out on the top 10 is the San Francisco 49ers home, Levi Stadium, currently called San Francisco Bay Area Stadium. Seating 68,827 in four tiers, Levi Stadium is one of the newer outdoor venues in the NFL, and it just hosted Super Bowl 60 this year. This venue, like many on the list, has hosted soccer games in the past, including a Chelsea Wrexham friendly in 2024. In addition, the San Jose Earthquakes generally play a game or two here each year. It's a fairly bizarre looking stadium going between four, three, and two tiers of seats, with all of the club seating clustered on the west side of the stadium. If you're sitting there, or in the north or the south for that matter, you'll probably have a solid view, but on the east side, you may get the sun in your eyes the whole time. And worse, if you're up in the fourth tier, which is almost 200 feet in the air, by the way, it doesn't really even feel like you're in the same stadium, with the views there being fairly ridiculously far from the action. This stadium, as has become a theme, isn't really in San Francisco. It's not really anywhere, actually. Technically, it's in Santa Clara, but unfortunately, it's kind of just in a hard to access part of San Jose, not really near any of San Francisco's famous sites or even the actual bay. Luckily, you do get the solid SoCal weather, and it's not as terribly hot as it is in the southern US. So it's a fine stadium to watch soccer in, and I do like most of the views, but the location and the terrible fourth level seats led me to put it in 11th, fairly close to the Athletics' tied 13th ranking for it. Breaking into the top 10, I have the second smallest stadium on our list, the 45,664 seat Estadio Akron, currently known as Estadio Guadalajara. Located in, you guessed it, Guadalajara, Mexico, it is one of the three Mexican stadiums in use for the World Cup. This stadium has, in my opinion, the coolest looking exterior of any stadium on the list. It's been made to look like a volcano, with grass sloping up over the exterior and giving it a natural look. It plays host to CD Guadalajara and Liga MX, and interestingly, hosted matches between New Caledonia and Jamaica and the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Jamaica for World Cup qualifiers. It's solid looking from the interior as well, but it's a fairly normal two tier all seater stadium inside. Additionally, it's sort of a pain in the butt to get to since it's on the very edge of Guadalajara and not near any of the city's accommodations at all. In totality, though, this is a solid stadium, better than the Athletics' 12th place rating for it, and a worthy host of World Cup games for Mexico. Now up to number 9, I picked Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, pretty far ahead of its tied for 13th place ranking on the Athletics list. This 64,478 seat stadium will host the third place game, and it's a pretty solid place to watch a soccer game. It's one of the largest two level stadiums in the world, and it underwent a massive renovation in the mid 2010s to add some much needed sun protection, replace the seats, and modernize the stadium as a whole. It currently hosts the Miami Hurricanes, the Miami Dolphins, the Miami Open in tennis, and the Orange Bowl. It hosted some Club World Cup games last year and some Copa America games in 2024, which definitely prepared the stadium for the World Cup in 2026. I love how the stadium itself looks, and I think it's a solid place for soccer to be played, but it's in the midst of the seemingly endless Miami sprawl between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, situated next to a bunch of single family homes and a Walmart. It's also the centerpiece of the Formula One Miami Grand Prix, which is similarly frustrating to get to. There is a shuttle service to the stadium for the World Cup, but usually it is terribly inconvenient to get to and not especially a loud or exuberant place to play in, which brings it down some on my list. In eighth place is the first Canadian stadium on the list, BMO Field, currently known as Toronto Stadium in Toronto. At 43,036 seats, it is the smallest stadium on the list, and interestingly, was originally constructed as a soccer specific stadium, but is now a mixed use venue since the Toronto Argonauts of the Canadian Football League moved in 10 years ago. This stadium is also the closest stadium to a major body of water on the list, as it is situated about 400 feet from Lake Ontario. It's a solid looking stadium, although the capacity has been greatly increased from 28,000 to 45,000 in order to work as a World Cup stadium. This is definitely the best choice out of any of the Toronto or Toronto adjacent stadiums, since the Rogers Center is busy with the Blue Jays and also awkwardly built for non baseball usage. And the other stadiums in the area are either too small or too far away from the city center. The massive temporary stands are a little bit awkward, and it is kind of outdated for only being 20 years old, but overall, it's in a good location, has a great atmosphere, and that's why I put it at 8th, not far off from the Athletics' tied 5th ranking for it. For number 7, I decided to put Estadio BBVA, currently known as Estadio Monterrey in Monterrey, Mexico. It has 51,243 seats, and if we were ranking these stadiums by their surroundings and their exterior views, this would surely be number 1. Situated, as much of Monterrey is, in the foothills of Cerro de la Silla, a 6,000-foot tall mountain, or 1,800 meters, your walk to the stadium, and maybe even your seat, will include some breathtaking views. Estadio BBVA opened in 2015 and has a really pretty modern design done by the multinational firm Populous and local firm VFO. My biggest gripe with this stadium is the actual game day experience you have if you attend a match there. There isn't much in terms of transit or parking near the stadium, which means, unless you're lucky, you're in for a fairly long walk in what can be some pretty brutal heat. Once inside, your experience will probably be great though, which is why the stadium does land in the top half of the list. Again, not far from the Athletics' tied fifth placement of it. Annoyingly, they had five stadiums listed as tied for fifth, which doesn't really seem like much of a ranking in my opinion. Anyways, back to the list. At number six is NRG Stadium, or Houston Stadium, the only World Cup stadium that I have had the pleasure of visiting during the actual World Cup. And boy, what an environment it was. I watched the Portugal versus Democratic Republic of the Congo game in the 68,777 seat stadium, and it was great because, of course, the Ronaldo fans were out in force, including iShow Speed, who had a giant security detail. It was loud the whole game, and when Portugal scored, the place went crazy, as did the Democratic Republic of the Congo fans when they scored to tie up the game. I've been NRG several times in the past, and during Texans games and college football games, it's definitely fun, but it was another level during the World Cup. It is getting old, and the Texans are rumored to be considering a move as it's currently kind of far south of most of the rest of Houston, located right next to the Astrodome, which is still standing, totally unoccupied. It is also the site of the largest parking lot in the world. I told you we'd come back to that, which makes for a great experience when you're trying to leave after a game. Just kidding. The stadium is right on a metro stop, but as anyone who's lived in Houston for long enough will tell you, the metro really is in need of an expansion. The stadium has hosted quite a few soccer games before, including the 2025 Gold Cup final. In its entirety, NRG isn't in a great location, but it partially makes up for it with a metro stop, and I think 6 is a solid spot for it, right alongside the Athletics' tied 5th ranking for it. At number 5 is Vancouver, Canada's BC Place. The 52,497 seat stadium is currently known as BC Place Vancouver, which is kind of funny, and it is the current home of the CFL's BC Lions and MLS's Vancouver Whitecaps, although unfortunately they may be heading to Las Vegas. It hosts the opening and closing ceremonies of the 2010 Olympics, hosted the 2015 Women's World Cup final, and has hosted several other Canadian national team games. The stadium probably has the best transit of any stadium on the list, as you can just take the SkyTrain right to it from most places in the city, and it's in a super walkable area. It has two tiers of seating, but generally only the bottom tier is open for Whitecaps games. The middle part of the roof can open and close, which is really cool, and it looks a lot better than the previous roof that deflated in 2007. The Athletic put the stadium at 11th and gave some very strange reasons, like it not feeling as big as other stadiums, while at the same time praising the game environment. I do agree with them that it would have been nice to have the roof open for games, but I also do get that FIFA didn't want shadows on the field if possible. In its entirety, it's super nice, it's easy to get to, and it's a great place to take in a game. I picked Mercedes Benz Stadium, currently known as Atlanta Stadium, in Atlanta, Georgia, for the number 4 spot. Right in the heart of Atlanta, directly next to the home of the Atlanta Hawks, this is a modern masterpiece that seats 68,239. I've walked by here a couple of times, but I've never been in it. It's near the Koch Museum and the Atlanta Aquarium, in a pretty cool spot in downtown. The Athletic put this at tied for number 1 for being indoors and gigantic, and while I'm not necessarily against indoor soccer, I do have a soft spot for the game being played outside. This stadium is excellent though. All four of these top four could easily be number 1, and I really wouldn't have an argument with you. Atlanta's MARTA lets you get there super easily, as it will literally drop you off right in the front of the stadium. And once you're indoors, it's clear why this venue hosts the SEC Championship and has hosted a Super Bowl. It's also the home of Atlanta United in the MLS, the most popular team in the NMLS, and consistently gets solid attendance for those games. As an aside, I really love the Jumbotron here. It's my second favorite one on the list, and I think the circular design that wraps around it is very cool. Also, I really think it's dumb that the Athletic had two stadiums tied for first on their ranking list. I just don't really get the point of something like that if half of the list is just going to be ties. On to the medalists, I have SoFi Stadium, currently known as Los Angeles Stadium, at number 3 on my list. This is my favorite NFL stadium that I've been to, with the 70,492 seat home of the LA Rams and LA Chargers just genuinely looking incredible inside and out. It's the most expensive stadium ever built, and you can tell. Everything inside feels modern and premium. The video board is massive and high quality. It's my favorite one on the list, and the stadium environment is incredible, especially when I went there for Chargers versus Chiefs. It hosted 4 games in 2025's CONCACAF Nations League final and was a great venue then, and it's doing the job now as well. The Athletic also had this at number 3, and obviously, I agree. My only little gripe is the transportation situation. It's in Inglewood, and I feel like LA is a big enough city that there should be better options than remote parking in a bus to get to the stadium, as that isn't necessarily the most fun time. Overall, this is an incredible venue, and I think it has done a good job of hosting this World Cup. Now, on to second place, I picked the one, the only Estadio Azteca. Currently known as Mexico City Stadium, this 80,824 seat venue is legendary for a reason. It's the oldest venue at the World Cup in addition to being the highest altitude, and it's hosted 2 World Cup finals in its history in 1970 and 1986. It's Mexico's and Club America's home stadium and was designed in the 1960s as the centerpiece of the 1968 Olympic bid that Mexico eventually received. It sits at 7,200 feet or 2,200 meters and it is a tough place to play, especially if you're not acclimated to the altitude. Everything here is well maintained, it's loud, it's historical, and it's a true coliseum of soccer. Yes, it sucks to get here, like with the other Mexican stadiums and most of the American stadiums, but you really can't fault it for much else. It is ridiculous that the Athletic put this at tied for 5th, and it's kind of disrespectful to the history and the majesty of this arena to put it that low. My favorite part about Azteca is just how yawning and huge it is. Looking up from the field level, you can just feel how historic it is and how incredible it must be to get to play in a place like this. An argument can certainly be made for Estadio Azteca to go at number 1 as well, but it was just edged out by my favorite stadium on the list. Finally, in first place is the home of the Seattle Seahawks and the Seattle Sounders, Lumen Field, currently known as Seattle Stadium. At 66,925 seats, this is the largest outdoor stadium in the US designed with soccer in mind. After Atlanta United, the Sounders are generally the most attended MLS team, and the 37,000 seats used for MLS games sell out most of the time. I've attended a Seahawks game here, and it's just incredible. It's loud, the sightlines are ridiculously good, everyone's into the game, the weather is great, and you can tell people care. Also, in a rare case for American stadiums, it's super easy to walk to and to use public transport to get to, with the light rail and the ferry right by it. Lumen hosted games at last year's Club World Cup and was held in high esteem by the players and the fans there. I honestly think that either Azteca or this stadium should have hosted the final, and they certainly should have at least both gotten the semifinals. It's really a disgrace that MetLife is hosting the final, and I am very sure that Seattle would have provided a far superior experience. The Athletic placed it at tied for first, but I have no such reservations. This is essentially a perfect soccer stadium in my books. It's loud, it's outdoors, it's big, and it's easy to see everything going on. And that is why I believe it is the best host stadium at the 2026 World Cup. Well, that's all from me. Please be sure to give this video a like and let me know your thoughts on my list in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching and have a good rest of your day.